Well, Mr. Gary Joyner, how are you this evening?
I am wonderful, Rex, down here on Caney Lake, watching the weather kind of get bad, and I hope it don't take us offline. But thank you for having me on.
No problem. Glad to have you on and glad to have a few folks watching. One thing to remind everybody that is watching, if you will like and share and tag and call a friend, phone a friend, text a friend, all that sort of good thing, we are live on both Facebook and on YouTube. And we're going to be discussing Caney Lake tonight. That is the topic of the show. You can see I've got the background of Caney Lake sitting back there, and I've got Mr. Gary Joyner on. He is president, or correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, president of the Jackson Parish Watershed Commission or Board. Is that your official title?
That is correct. I am the new president and treasurer of the Jackson Parish Watershed District, newly elected as president this year.
Excellent, excellent. So, folks, we're going to be discussing all things Caney Lake. I think we kind of plan to go through the history of Caney Lake and on into the present. We're going to talk about fishing and water skiing maybe a little bit. We're going to talk about Salvinia, the evil weed, Hydrilla, the good stuff, and anything else that we can talk about. I want to encourage everybody to comment if you want, and if I see some of those, if you have a question or something, put it in the comments on the show, whether on YouTube or on Facebook, and I'll be glad to put those up in the show, and we can ask Mr. Gary, or I'll try to answer it, or whatever the case is. But all right, let's go ahead and I say we just go ahead and get started into it. So why don't you go ahead and just formally introduce yourself and kind of go through your history with Caney Lake and how you got to be around Caney and on the watershed board and just run with it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me on and getting an opportunity to share my love for Caney Lake. Um, I've been serving on the Jackson Parish Watershed Board now for a little over almost 3 years. And I was previously the vice president and treasurer. And again, like I say, this year I was elected president. I have been on Caney Lake and lived on Caney Lake for 24 years and been an avid fisherman. Spent a lot of time recreation. My kids were able to catch their first fish on Caney Lake, and we were able to, have recreational fun on Caney Lake. So I have been around Caney for 24 years and enjoyed every minute of it, and just fell in love with it. And when the Jackson Parish Police Jury called and asked me, would I mind serving on the Jackson Parish Watershed District, I had a little bit of reserve. But on the other hand, I made the decision that if you like something or you love something, to be a good public servant, you need to enjoy what you're doing. And I said yes, and I have no regrets for signing up to be on the Jackson Parish Watershed.
Excellent. So I want to go over my history of Caney Lake just a little bit, and then we'll get some more into the watershed board and what you guys actually do. So I started fishing Caney back in the 80s, back in the really late 80s, 88 to 89 time period. I always tell everybody I started fishing it when the only boat ramp was the one at the dam, and there were still willow trees and pine trees out there before it even hit pool stage. And you could go out there with a spinnerbait. I used to fish, used to go with my good buddy, and actually the guy that started this television show with me, the Outdoor News, back in the 90s. John Brown Jr. and I used to go out there with these Limberneck brand spinner baits, and we would absolutely wear the 2 to 3.5 and 4 pound fish. We thought we were in heaven out there. So I've been fishing Caney for a long time. Fast forward into the 90s, I was down there fishing a lot with Dana J. Walker, who's kind of my fishing mentor and all that. And I remember the Hydrilla war, so to speak, back then, and the release of the Carp and the that whole debacle, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But anyway, so fast forward, I started fishing again back in 2019. Bought me a boat and have made a trip or two down to Caney, but no big fish yet. I've caught them 5 to 6 pounds, but nothing big yet. So anyway, that's kind of my history for everybody that's listening with Caney Lake. So I've been fishing Caney for a very long time, although I skipped about a 10 or 15 year period in there. All right. So with that said, um, let's go ahead and I don't know if I want to go into the history and the carp and all that first, or if we want to talk about the watershed board. I, let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's go back in time, Mr. Gary, and I think you have some really good history that you want to share. And let's talk about the history of Caney from the get go. I mean, when the idea first came up in the legislature?
Well, the best I can tell, that the dream of Caney Lake came to fruition in the early '60s, and a fellow by the name of Woody McDonald, that is a resident was resident here on Caney Lake, um, made the executive decision that he wanted a lake, and he wanted to bring everybody on board to try to make that happen. And so, with that being said, that was in the early '60s. Well, it grew legs, and in 1968, there was the Watershed Commission was formed. 1968 through the legislation of act of there, and a bill that was introduced by then Mr. Henry, Bubba Henry. And from that point, you had to have a watershed uh, statutes created before you could have a lake created. But that's kind of where it started at in 1968, and then from there, um, fast forward to 1972, the first board watershed commission was appointed in 1972, and Mr. Woody McDonald was the president of that very first commission. And and I would just like to stop right there and pause just for a minute and say a very special thank you to each and every board member that has served in the past and in the present since the beginning of time. And I know that there have been some trials and tribulations, but this is a public service job. It's a non-paying job, and there have been many people that have been on board that have seen Caney go from basically woods to water, as the article that was written back last year, highlighting exactly how Caney come to fruition. But in my opinion, Rex, had there had to be a vision to start with, and there were two locations for Caney Lake. One being up in the equipment area, and the second being where we are right now. And between the LADOTD, they looked at the watershed, and so all of the fingers that feed Caney Lake all became a very important part of how the watershed was going to be uh, flooded with water whenever there was a rain. So the creeks and the creek arms that you see today were pivotal in the formation of Caney Lake because of the small watershed.
It didn't it take took several years for it to even get to pool stage. I know let me interject for a second. So the story that I always heard way back when was that, it had gotten kicked around, and the idea, and they were trying to get funding for it, and it just took a while and all that. And so by the time the lake was actually, I guess, officially impounded or whatever, the dam was created and all that, they had gone in there and cleared out the timber, and the uh, timber had grown back up into what I refer to as the willow tree and pine tree days. But that's the story that I heard, and so that it actually, yeah, like you said, started back in the '60s, but we didn't actually, have water in the thing until the '80s, and I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, that's correct. And uh, according to my records, the 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 gates were closed February of 1986, and from that point, it took 35 months for the lake to fill up. And what we call the fill mark is the 200-foot mean sea level. And so there was a lot of water in the lake, but it was kind of scattered out. But it wasn't going to get start backing up until the gates were actually closed. So yeah, my records indicate that was February of 1986 when the gates were actually closed. So it
Now,
took almost 3 years for it to fill up.
now, and maybe you do or don't know any of this history, but it was my understanding that there were some brood ponds that the wildlife and fisheries had that they used for initial stocking. Do you know anything about that? And I may be catching you off guard if you don't know about it, but um, do you know anything about that? Because there were some awful big fish that have came out of Caney from the get go, and of course are still coming out of that lake.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any brood ponds. That's a little before my time.
Okay. All right. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and take us through the rest of it, and also I want you to touch on when you get ready some more on the commission and the board because you mentioned that it's a non-paying position, and so I think a lot of people might think that these boards and commissioners and all that it's actually paid, but we want to get into some of that discussion and also what kind of budget you guys have and all that. So whenever you're ready.
Right. Well, yeah. We have the police jury appoints 7 members from each of the 7 districts in Jackson Parish, and so they try to well represent the entire parish with the board. And like you say, it's we everyone knows that when they sign up to be on the Jackson Parish Watershed Commission, that it is going to be a non-paying position. And um, through the efforts of many, we seen that a lot of guys that get on the board, they say, well, it's really not what I really wanted, or really not cut out for me, or whatever. But then again, we have had so many great commissioners that have been on the lake and that have really really dedicated time and energy toward their love for Caney Lake, and I think that's an inspiration for the new guys that are on the board today and those that'll be in the future to come. Is that without the original um, board members, you know, going through trials and tribulations, and obviously there were mistakes that were made, and but there was some positive that was gained as well. And it's hard to believe that in 1967, whenever there was the first map that showed up, that Caney Lake would be what it is today, and what it was in the early 90s. So the vision that was there was a recreational lake that would be for recreation, give people an opportunity to go out and ski, and then the other opportunity was to allow people to go and potentially catch a record bass, and we have the best of both worlds. I mean, that's why I think that Caney is a unique creature in that um, you can go fish in the mornings and try to catch a state record bass, and in the afternoon you can hook the tube up to the boat and pull kids around on the tube. And I think that's why it's really really unique in that aspect, Rick.
Well, yeah, unlike, I'm a big bass fisherman and that's my first love, but also, like you said, the water skiers and the tubers and all that, Caney Lake is unusual in that it doesn't have very many hazards in it. I mean, there's a few places where there's some shallow water, and if you go way up in the backs of the creeks, but for the most part, it's pretty much wide open, and so it makes for a great skiing and just overall recreation lake. And I think that's a good point to bring up, even though this is a fishing and hunting show. You're right, Caney Lake is unique in that it has very clean water generally.
That's correct. And and you hear people all the time say that when they come to Caney Lake and they come to the state park and they stay there, you've got I honestly believe that the state park that we have is one of the absolute wonders of Louisiana. If you've never driven through the state park, of course, we know that it was almost devastated by a tornado, but I applaud the Parks and Recreation for for what they have done to restore the park back to what it maybe not to what it was, but it looks really good. As we were there for the high school fishing tournament, but we truly have a gym in our state park that allows many people to come and play on the beach and just enjoy the recreation, enjoy the outdoors, and also enjoy the fishing. And I think that's what separates Caney from a lot of different lakes in Louisiana.
Yeah, I would agree with that. we're gonna get some more into the fishing side of it for those of you that are just now tuning in and all that. But I want to say this: I want to go back in time a little bit. So back in the early '90s, I was in the North Central Bass Club out of Ruston, Louisiana. I'm originally from Ruston, and anyway, I remember fishing a night tournament on Caney. This is in the early '90s when there were only three boathouses on the whole lake, and this thunderstorm was rolling in. It rained like 7 or 8 inches that night between 10 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. It rained 7 inches during the tournament. And so I was fishing with this guy, and I was the boater and all that, and we saw the thunderstorm rolling in. I was like, oh boy. I said, there ain't but three boathouses. We got to go see if we can find one real quick. Hopefully there ain't a boat in it. We can kind of steal the boathouse for the night, so to speak. But anyway, we pulled up in there and we got lucky, and we got one of the three spots in the stalls, and we sat there and threw out of the back of the boat for a couple of hours, and I actually caught one about 3.5 pounds fishing out of the back of the boathouse. But to see where Caney is now compared to then with the nice homes and nice boat docks. I know we stayed at one of those rental places over there near the dam, Airbnb type deal that I think they call it Caney Lake Views or whatever. Anyway, really nice stuff and really nice facilities. And I'll tell you, the state park, I kind of moved off from Louisiana for a while, and when I came back and have gone down there to visit Caney, I cannot believe the state park that is down there. You're right; it is an absolute gem sitting there.
Right. And you know, I would think that of course you've been fishing on Caney obviously a little longer than I have, but just being on the watershed in the last 3 years, I have probably, you're talking about three boat sheds or boat houses. I have probably permitted about 75 boat docks or boat sheds in the last 3 years. So just to show you the popularity of Caney through the permitting process is has been really great for the parish. But it tells me that a lot of people are interested in Caney Lake. They want to come to Caney Lake. They want to you know have kids and show that the kids the recreation side of it and adults and retirement. I mean, you can find all ages of people and that are getting the opportunity to enjoy Caney Lake.
Speaking of that permitting deal, so that's something I want you to explain because I don't think a lot of people know what exactly for instance, up here we have the Cypress Lake District Commission that they manage Cypress and Black Bayou up here around Benton and Bossier City. But I want you to explain what the Jackson Parish Watershed Board or Commission does. You talked about the permitting and all that. So what all do you do?
Okay. Well, we're bound by Louisiana statutes that allow the watershed to issue building permits for anything that is built over the water. So with the 200-foot field mark or the 200-foot MSL mark, anywhere beyond the 200-foot mark, the watershed has jurisdiction over to issue building permits. And with those building permits, our primarily focus is to make sure that people do not go out further than 90 feet if it's in open water. We make sure that people do not encroach on other people's property or be within 10 foot of the property. And then finally, if you are in a cove, we make sure that you can only access or have the ability to build 30% of that cove, to not be looking at the opposing shoreline to give somebody the opportunity to build a bridge across a cove. So those are the things that we do, and we physically have to go and put our eyes on each and every permit that's issued, and and just make sure that the people are following the letter of the law. And then once the watershed issues a building permit, which costs $50, then they're able to take that building permit to the Jackson Parish Police Jury and finish the process. And that way the police jury knows what Jackson Parish Watershed is doing, and in that way they can verify the addresses, and they can make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
So I also noticed because I took a look at your permit application on the Jackson Parish website and all that, and do y'all also have some control or say so, for instance, if people are building seawalls and stuff like that? So, in other words, if somebody wants to come in there and they want to bring dirt in and create their own beach, or if they want to build a seawall and need to remove some dirt, how do you can you kind of go over a little bit about maybe how that process works?
Sure. We invited the Army Corps of Engineers to come to one of our meetings about 3 years ago, and we got them to explain the general rule of what is allowed and what is not allowed when it comes to a seawall. And the gist of their meeting was, as long as someone follows the shoreline of the Caney Lake shoreline, which is originally, we're at the 200-foot mark. If somebody originally follows that line, there's really not going to be much of an issue or a gripe within the Corps of Engineers. However, with that being said, the any fill material that is put into Caney Lake can fall under the Clean Water Act, which is also jurisdictional under the Army Corps of Engineers. So what they do not want is they don't want people dumping fill material in Caney Lake that can cause an issue with the water and the sanitation and the cleanliness of the reservoir. So there are limits as to how far you can go out in the water, but it's very minimal based on the 200-foot shoreline. And so so the watershed really has, we don't have any jurisdiction on seawalls. All of that falls under the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And if somebody is planning on taking in a lot of land, or if they wanting to build that beach, so to speak, they can contact the Army Corps of Engineers, fill out a 404 permit, allow the Army Corps of Engineers to come take a look. And if the Army Corps of Engineers sign off on it, then more than likely the Jackson Parish Watershed will sign off on it.
Yeah, see, I'm getting educated, and you're teaching me something I didn't know already. All right, so I'm going to switch screens because we're talking about this 200-foot mark. And let me click a couple of buttons here. And so you might not be able to read this, but folks, for those of you that are watching on your mobile or whatever, the type may be a little bit small, but don't worry about it because I'm just going to kind of talk us through it. So this is the letter from the DOTD, Louisiana DOTD, back when Edwin Edwards was governor. Edwin Edwards was governor back in '87. Anyway, it says, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just kind of summarize a little bit. It says, as you're aware, Caney Lake has been slowly filling towards its normal pool stage of 200-foot mean sea level. We also understand that people are beginning to utilize the reservoir for recreational activities. We feel it is appropriate at this time for the watershed district to take certain actions to provide the general public with various information about the lake, such as lake hazards and surcharges. Also, the watershed district should establish a permitting process to regulate development along the lake. And then it goes down a couple of paragraphs and it says the fluctuation in lake level above normal pool is referred to as lake surcharge. Caney Lake will rise, surcharge, approximately 4.5 feet for the 100-year storm event. On very rare storm events, the lake may surcharge some 12.5 feet above the 200-foot pool stage elevation. So that's kind of interesting. How high have you ever seen Caney Lake? What did it get to back in the 2016 flood?
Well, from all accounts, the 2016 flood did set the new flood record for Caney Lake, and according to what I have been told, is that it got to 204.6 in 2016.
Yeah, so that hit their 100-year mark, and they looks like they called it pretty accurately back there in '87. And of course, that one though on the very rare storm events, that 12.5 feet, that's got me a little worried.
What well, what that is, that's the LADOTD's disclaimer that that's the height of the levee.
Right.
And so when they issue a disclaimer, what they say is, if you read on down, it says that anybody that builds less than the height of the top of the levee could be in danger of flooding based on that elevation. So Uh, but also historically, what did it take to get to the flood of record? Well, over a 3 day period, Caney got 21. We got 21 inches of rain, as recorded in the from the Monroe Regional Airport. Nobody at that particular time on Caney was keeping up with rainfall, rain log. There were no gauges in place. There were really very limited, excuse me, information about lake fall, lake rise, that etc. So the flood of 2016, when it started occurring, it caught several people off guard because they, obviously in a 100-year flood, people didn't really have time to react. And when you started getting, that type of rain that quick, and Caney started coming up, it really did catch a lot of people off guard, Rex. And so since 2016, the Jackson Parish Watershed did install a level gauge, a water level gauge that is real time now, where anybody can log in and see what the water level gauge is, as well as we put individual gauges, one at the Ebenezer Park and one at the Spillway, that allows people to actually physically now do a visual and see where the water level is. But yeah, the flood of 2016 was not only affected Caney Lake, but it also affected all the other lakes around the area, and it set flood record marks for just about every lake in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, it Caddo came up. I mean, of course, Caddo and Bistineau, and even Darbone Lake, of course, up there at Farmville, all have large or relatively large watersheds, and they'll fluctuate quite a bit. For Caney to come up that far, I mean, that's a lot of water, without a doubt. All
Yes,
right,
it was.
so I'm gonna switch screens here for a second again, and I've got the map of Caney Lake pulled up. And I thought we might just, talk about this. Of course, it may be a little hard for people to see if they're on mobile, but you can go to Google Maps and pull this up real easily. So we'll start at the dam down here, and folks, you can see kind of down here in the, I guess it would be the southeast corner of the lake. You'll see the dam or the spillway. It's a not a huge dam, but pretty good size. Then you've got, so there's several marinas or boat ramps on the lake now. Am I correct about that, Gary?
That's correct. There are five places that people can publicly access the water. One being Hooks Marina on Spillway Road. Then we have the two at the state park. Then we have one at Ebenezer Boat Landing, and then we have another one at Caney Lake Landing. And those are the five boat launches that people can utilize on Caney Lake.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I always refer to it as Brown's Landing because that's how, we all knew it from the old days. But I believe that old Brown's Landing, which I think burned down at one point in time in the 90s or maybe mid 2000s, I can't remember. Anyway, I think it's under somebody else purchased that marina and store down there recently.
That's correct. That's correct. They have new owners that own Caney Lake Landing, and um, uh, they're doing their absolute best with the landing there, and serving really nice food, and have beverages on that end of the lake, and have a place for people to eat and come and look out at a beautiful open body of water right there. So and as well as at the spillway, people can, there's a restaurant there, and people can go and dine there at the restaurant on both ends of the lake. So they can really pick whichever end of the lake they want to. And of course, a lot of the homeowners on the lake, they boat to either one of those places. And then a lot of times when people stay at some of the Airbnbs on the water, they can boat to either of the establishments on either end of the lake. So that does kind of make it kind of unique that you can take a little boat ride and then go eat a nice meal at one of at two of those restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't take 5 or 10 minutes to run in a decent sized boat from one end of the lake to the other. How many? What is Caney? Is it about 3,500 acres, or am I off a little bit? How big is Caney? Do you know
It's
offhand?
it's it's actually a little closer to 5,000 acres.
Closer to 5,000. Okay, I couldn't remember for sure. All right. Well, I guess we need to talk about. So let's see. We've talked about kind of the history. And let's go kind of switch gears and go back in time a little bit, and let's discuss a little bit more from the early 90s forward, because we didn't really get into the fishing records and all that. So um, maybe why don't you walk us through? I know obviously some of that history and all that, but maybe kind of walk us through, and then I may interject a few comments here and there as we go.
Right. Well, well, again, like we wanted to reiterate that, it took from February of 1986 to almost February of 1989. It took the lake to fill up. Well, the one of the and people were starting to catch nice fish out of Caney Lake prior to 1992, when Mr. Brian Davis caught the very first state record out of Caney Lake. He caught a 1431, and legend says that he caught it under the Smith Creek Bridge on Lakeshore Drive about early a.m. in the morning, night fishing. And so that was when I guess the very first state record that came out of Caney, and that is when the spotlight actually got put on Caney as far as big fish. And then I think from there, there was just multiple 14-pound fish that were being caught out of Caney, and the at one time, 17 out of the top 20 fish, big fish that were recorded in the state of Louisiana, came out of Caney Lake. So that is quite a history from 1989 all the way to 1994, when Mr. Greg Wiggins caught the current state record bass out of Caney Lake, which is a 15.97 bass that still is the current state record. And so, that pretty well, that era of Caney Lake um, really put Caney on the map as far as there, there was boats. I mean, you could drive to any of the boat launches and you could see boats from Tennessee, Texas, Arkansas, all over the United States. People were coming to Caney Lake and fish. And I tell people a funny story one time. You know where Chatham Lake is, downtown Chatham. Well, they have a sign there at Chatham Lake, and it says, "Welcome to the gateway to Caney Lake." Well, back in the early '90s, when Caney was in its heyday, I drove around the levee there, and there was this big boat guy launching this big boat there, and I knew it looked a little out of place for Chatham Lake, and I said, pulled up to him, and I said, "You getting ready to go fishing?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "I've heard a lot about Caney Lake here." And he looked and he said, "How far does it go to the left? If you're looking at the boat launch, just only just a few acres." And I said, "Wait a minute, you think this is Caney Lake?" And he's like, "Well, there was a sign out there that said Gateway to Caney Lake." And I was like, "Oh no, this is Chatham Lake." I said, "It's only about 100 acres." So anyhow, it's kind of a funny story, but that's somebody from Tennessee didn't know where they were at in Louisiana. So, but we truly, Caney has come a long way, since the gates were closed.
In all the times I've driven through Chatham and gone past Chatham Lake, I am yet to put my boat in. And it looks like such a great lake. I am yet to put a boat in in Chatham Lake. I always bypass and go straight to Caney. I've got a picture of the current Louisiana state fish records pulled up here. And so out of the top 10, 5 are still from Caney in that mid '90s period, most of them, and that's a testament to Caney Lake and the big fish. And I want to say this because I want to talk about the whole carp situation, and we'll kind of dive off into that for a few minutes anyway. But the carp didn't kill the big fish. I mean, it's not like the carp are eating the bass. The carp are doing what carp do, which is eat the grass in the hydrilla and literally everything, every blade of grass in that lake. But it changed the fishing, and it changed the way that those fish were spawning down there. But the big fish never left. And so they're still in there, and they were continuing to spawn and pass their genes. And Gary, I know, even during that period after the '90s, there were still a few people catching big fish down there.
right. And I think the tactics changed, Rex. And and when I say by the tactics, I mean the fish became, when there wasn't any vegetation for them to get around, they went to the deeper structures out in the deeper parts of the lake. And even today, right now, um, fish cannot hide with the forward facing sonars and all of that. But I've had numerous anglers tell me that it's just unbelievable at the amount of big fish that are hanging out in the 30-foot water in the standing timber. So one thing that fishermen need, that you got a lot of people that pound the banks looking for the big fish, but based on what I'm hearing and what I'm hearing, seeing people talk about, is the big fish. There are, although there are some up shallow, but there's a lot of big fish that have adapted to actually going out in deep water. And fish are spawning and they have been for years spawning in 10 foot of water. So there's a lot of fish that are spawning there that have always spawned in 10 foot of water. And so,
Well, I'll say this: back, I used to fish, like I said, a lot with a fellow named Dana Walker, and he was had caught a lot of double digit fish, and honestly, I've caught plenty of fish over 10 pounds back in the heyday during the '90s, early '90s, and all that. But Dana showed me we were bed fishing 8 to 10 foot deep on some of those beds, and even back in the early '90s, before the carp, those big fish, a lot of people don't realize how deep some of those big,
mm,
I mean, big fish, double digit 10, 11 pounders will spawn out there in that deeper water, even way back then. And so when those carp came in, it made the water turbid. They ripped up all the grass, ate all the grass, did all that kind of stuff. You don't have the grass in there to filter the water. The water actually, for Caney Lake, became, not muddy, but what I call turbid.
yep.
And but a lot of those fish were still spawning out there in that deeper water. I've got a screenshot on the screen, and it may be a little hard to read, but this is a recent media bass tournament result, and first place was 32 pounds, and there have been a ton of 30 and 40 and bumping 50-pound five fish stringers come out of Caney just in the last couple of years. Why don't you talk a few minutes about MLF coming down to Caney?
Oh wow. They're I've told many people before that there's highlights in your life where you can go back and you say, well, that was an amazing moment in your life. And next to getting married and having kids, I believe that when and this was in August of 2021, I got a telephone call from Florida. So I'm looking at this number on my telephone, and I'm trying to figure out who it is. But this guy starts by saying and introducing himself, and he said, "Hi, my name is Michael Malone, and I'm with Major League Fishing, and we would like to come to Caney in February of 2022." And so I'm trying to figure out who's pranking me, because I know I've got some buddies that would love to do that. And so I am Googling on my phone, trying to talk, trying to listen to him. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I'm saying this, to the VP of operations and events. And I'm just kind of not really giving a whole lot of information to him. And indirectly, I look up and I say, Michael Malone, Executive Director of Major League Fishing and Events from Florida. And I was like, oh, wow, I am talking to the Michael Malone of Major League Fishing. So um, when he told me that Major League Fishing was interested in coming to Caney Lake, I honestly believe that was a moment where a 55-year-old man got to be somewhere around 12 or 13 years old. And and the other thing is that he told me that I had to keep it a secret.
Oh,
And so so he said, well, you cannot tell anyone that Major League Fishing is coming to Caney Lake, and until it's announced. And so I didn't do what he said. When he come home, I told my wife, I said, you're not going to believe who I got a telephone call from, but Major League Fishing's coming to Caney Lake. And she's like, who or what? So that was certainly a highlight for me and for our parish. And and I go back to that time, and I think about um, what it would what it was like, and when it was actually announced that Major League Fishing was coming to Caney Lake in February, one of the questions that Mr. Malone asked me was, he said, "Do you think the guys are going to have any luck catching fish?" And I just kind of laughed and I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I feel very certain that somebody is going to catch a double-digit fish." And lo and behold, Mr. Randy Howell did catch a double-digit fish. But but I would like to just kind of rewind again on that by saying that whenever Major League Fishing made the decision that they were going to come, a lot of people were saying, "Well, why does it keep saying Monroe, West Monroe on the TV?" And that's because Monroe, West Monroe was actually the host. So just like to thank them for allowing allowing Major League Fishing is to be the host. It's just Caney Lake was the spot. And so when I went and met with the Jackson Parish Tourism Board, a very fine group of ladies, and I cannot commend them enough for what they did for this tournament, and how they rolled out the red carpet for Major League Fishing. But when I told them what was coming, here I am meeting with a group of ladies, and some of which fish, some of which live on the lake. But I said, you don't understand. This is like the NFL coming to Caney Lake. This is like Tom Brady coming to Caney Lake. This is like would be like Tiger Woods going to the golf course. And so it kind of went from there. But the community involvement with Major League Fishing, Rex, was just off the chart. And and there were so many million views that were taking place. And I think when Randy Howell caught that double digit fish, I believe it was 10 pounds, 14 ounce. I was there with the tournament director at that time, and he looked at me and he said, "Will you call that somebody was going to catch a double digit fish?" And we could not be more excited as a community, and being able to host Major League Fishing not one time but two.
Yeah, yeah, y'all actually had the opportunity to do their what do they call it thing? The big bass or not big bass?
The heavy hitters.
Heavy hitters. That's what it's called. Yeah, y'all had the opportunity to host them down there on Caney Lake. And look, a lot of people, one of the complaints now is, well, there's so many boats on Caney Lake. Blah blah blah. Look, I hate to tell you folks this that are watching the show or may see the replay and all that, it's still not as busy as it was back in the early 90s. Of course, like my kids say, Dad, everything you did was 30 years ago. But I'm just telling you, back then, it was, there were twice as many boats on Caney Lake as there are now because that was the era when, catching big fish, lots of big fish, was still relatively new. My good friend Glenn Harris wrote a couple of articles about Caney Lake, and then it just got ridiculous. If you put in at the dam or you put in at the old Browns Landing, you'd have to park your vehicle about a half a mile down the road, down the highway, and walk all the way back. That's how many vehicles and trucks and trailers there were on the lake. So, um, it's a little different these days. Now we got social media and and all that and YouTube plus all the TV coverage and look, I just want to say that was an absolutely positive event for Caney Lake in the area having MLF down there.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point that since 1993, 94, in that era, um, there's not been parking like that since that era. And what I mean by that is, like you say, there were times that and most people are familiar with the Ebenezer boat launch, but there were cars that were parked or boats that were parking, double parking all the way out to Highway 4 beyond where the church is. And that's never been seen. Um, People were parking, like I say, down the Spillway Road and walking back a half a mile to Caney Lake. So, yeah, I mean, as far as the number of boats, yes, there are a lot of people that are fishing Caney, but there is not near the number of people that are fishing Caney, that were fishing Caney like it was back in the heyday.
Yeah, and but the good side is now, like you said, with the state park there, and multiple launches and improved parking and all that. Even when there are a lot of boats and trucks and vehicles down there, Caney's got adequate parking, and some really good boat ramps. Let's talk for a few minutes. If you don't mind, I'll keep you for a little bit longer if this thunderstorm stays at bay out there. But let's talk about the Watershed Commission and how you guys generate revenue and what your responsibilities are. Because you said that y'all aren't, y'all don't get paid a salary or anything, but how do you draw revenue? Do y'all get money from the state? Do you get money from the local community? Does the police jury give you money? How does that work?
Well, thanks for asking that. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the watershed does not receive taxpayer funds and never has received taxpayer funds for the maintenance of the boat ramps in which the watershed is under our responsibility. Currently the Ebenezer boat ramp that is there, the Jackson Parish watershed paid for a servitude back in 1987, and they paid around $20,000 from the watershed's account that gave them servitude rights for the Ebenezer boat ramp. Well, the part of the deal was that the Ebenezer boat ramp had to be kept by the Jackson Parish Watershed Commission. So um, that was one spot. Of course, the Spillway Marina was the other that the Jackson Parish Watershed owns. And so uh, years ago, the Jackson Parish Watershed sold some water out of Caney Lake, and then they sold water out of Chatham Pond that actually generated the most money that was able to be put into the watershed's bank account. So for years, the watershed was operating out of selling water to some of the pipeline companies and some of the oil wells companies that was in and around the lake. So that's where they got the bulk of the revenue from, not from taxpayers or anything like that. And as that money started to dwindle out in and around 2016, the bank account got really low, and so then the watershed made the executive decision that they were going to start charging a $3 boat launch fee at the Ebenezer boat launch and at the Spillway launch. And then they were going to provide a, um, annual permit that someone could pay a $40 permit for and launch for a whole year for $40. So the bulk of our revenue, some $10,000 for the 2023, was come from the people paying the boat launch fees. And the other revenue that we generate is from building permits, which I think I did around 40 building permits last year at $50 a pop, and on that, and then we sell or issue duck blind permits for hunters that hunted on Caney Lake. So those are our three sources of revenue, and and so we did last year. We were able to enter into a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Jackson Parish Recreation Department, but due to funding in 2024, we lost that, and that did not renew for 2024. So as it stands, I mean that boat launch fees are collected, are our only source of revenue, and that money that we collect, it pays for lighting, it pays for restrooms, it pays for upkeep to the piers, and thankfully our sheriff department mows the boat launches for us, and so there's quite a bit of things that we would like to do. We just don't have the funds to do. And one of the things that we're most proud of is we built one of the nicest fishing piers in the state of Louisiana there at the Ebenezer Park just this past year in a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Jackson Parish Watershed, and the watershed paid for part of the funds. The recreation department paid for part of it, and then we had a local Pledge 10 organization that issued a grant that gave us money that helped build that pier. And if people have not seen the pier, it's one of the nicest piers that you'll ever see that is designed for fishing. So that's kind of the gist on our revenue stream, and it's always been that way. And um, so that's kind of where we stand.
Well, that just amazes me because for instance, the using the Cypress district up here, which again does Cypress and Black Bayou, they're basically sister lakes right there. They have a tax millage. As a matter of fact, I think it's 1.54 mils or something that they are able to tax over 80 something percent of the taxing districts in Bossier Parish. And then they also charge boat ramp fees. They've got a park up there. It's not a state park, it's actually the Cypress Park that they manage. And so I was really surprised to learn that you guys don't have any of that. It's just the selling of water, in the past, and then those boat launch fees. That's really amazing. I'll say this: I absolutely don't mind paying the boat launch fees, and I think you should probably go to $5 because it's just easier to whoop out a $5 bill these days. As long as you don't do the boat stickers, where you got to have a sticker to put on your boat, then I'll be good with it.
All right. Well, and and it's kind of not being um, on the board, but for 3 years, it's kind of easy to go back in time and say what we should have done or what should have been done. I've been very vocal about this, and I said that, when the first state record bass was caught out of Caney Lake, that was probably the ideal time for the parish to pass some kind of millage to, because at that particular time in history, um, that was the very first event where people started noticing Caney Lake as and noticing where Jackson Parish was on the map, and so I think there was an opportunity missed way back when, and but it is what it is. We're able to, as long as we're able to provide a clean boat ramp, good lighting, clean restrooms, as long as we're able to do what we need to do with the boat launch fees that are being paid, um, and we're able to let the anglers and the people that utilize those ramps, let them physically see how the money's being used, and of course I don't mind being transparent and showing, on the reports where the money's being used, and so all I do is just encourage people that are using the ramps to just pay your boat launch fee, and if you have any questions, you can certainly call me, but I think they can see where their money's being spent well.
Yeah, I know that you had shared out the part of the financials for the commission down there on one of the Caney Lake pages, and I really appreciated, and I know a lot of other people do that. That being transparent there. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot because a little bit, Caney Lake is a reservoir, and you mentioned that in the past, the commission had sold off some water or whatever, probably to the fracking companies or whatever, and that's fine. Do you guys have any plans to do that in the future if you need to? Because a lot of people don't realize, first and foremost, it's a water reservoir. And so it is made for agriculture and the community, priority number one. Secondary would be boating, recreation, fishing, and all that. All us bass fishermen like to think they put all these lakes here just for us to bass fish, but that's not necessarily true. Do you
Hey, Sandy.
do you have a do y'all have any idea? I mean,
Sandy.
on how you might generate some revenue in the future, or if you feel that you need to, or are y'all able to get by with what you're doing so far?
Sandy.
Oh, did I lose you? Did I lose you? Hold on just a second. Technical difficulties, folks. I can hear you, Gary. Hold on just a second. Technical difficulties. All right, so we're gonna pause for just a second and let's let Gary get himself plugged back in there.
Okay, we back on, Rex?
I could hear you fine the whole time. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello. Can you hear me, Gary? I can hear you fine. Can you hear me? All right, let's do this. All right, let's send Gary out for just a minute and hold on just a second. Let me send him a text. That's a live show, folks, so bear with me just a second. And we'll see if we can get Gary back in here. Let's see. Let me text him another link. And again, pardon the interruptions, but it is a live show. And so, a couple of rules about live shows. Number one, no takebacks. And number two, well, sometimes technical things happen. So, let's see if we can get Gary back in. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, just
Sorry
a little
about that.
That's okay. Technical glitch. It's a live show, so technical glitch. All right, let me get you zoomed back in and all right, so let me let me represent my question because I don't know where we really cut off. But you mentioned earlier that the watershed commission had generated some revenue from selling water off on the lake, and a lot of people forget that Caney Lake, like most of our lakes around here, the man-made ones are reservoirs, and it's for residential, commercial, and agricultural use first. Fishing and recreation, boating and water skiing and all that secondary. Do you guys foresee in the future that you may have to generate some revenue by selling water, or the launch fees adequate? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, if you know, we would certainly be open that if someone contacts us and said they need some water for either fracking or for do a hydro on a pipeline, then absolutely we'd be certainly open to that. As part, to be able to generate revenue and as I see it right now, Rex. If we had any major projects, then we know that we can go through capital outlay and go through our parish jurisdiction, which is the police jury, if we saw something big that might need doing. But as it stands right now, it's the money that's generated through the boat launch fees is adequate to take care of the needs that we have right now. But yes, we would certainly be open that if somebody knocked on the door and needed needed a few thousand gallons or a few 100,000 gallons of water, then absolutely we would be open for that.
All right, so the thunderstorms are starting to roll in here pretty good. So I don't think we need to tempt fate too much longer. But I do want to touch just for a few minutes on the Hydrilla and the Salvinia situation. And I want to keep this on a fairly positive, upbeat note. So I'll just give a quick summary version. Back in the 90s, the hydrilla growth, was coming on pretty good and all that. The state did try to spray it. They were not able to get it under control. They made the what I consider ill-fated decision to put the dadgum carp in there, and they ate every stitch of grass in the lake. And most of us know kind of the history. Like I said, it didn't kill off all the fish, but as far as a very popular fishery, Caney Lake had a very stagnant period during the mid to late 90s and I would argue into the early 2000s. Okay, so fast forward to now. The Hydrilla is coming back. Most of us fishermen believe that's a good thing, and I think the weights of fish as far as bass fishing are concerned, most people would view that, most bass fishermen would view that as a good thing. Now, of course, you have the other side, which is water skiers and pleasure boaters, and they don't typically like the grass, and a lot of the camp owners. So there's always this dynamic and this tug of war. And then you have the salvinia, which is a devil weed. So let's kind of touch on those two things, the current state of hydrilla and spraying on Caney Lake and Salvinia, and the Jackson Parish Watershed Commission's role in that, and working with the wildlife and fisheries and the police jury and all the other entities. So you want to kind of shed a little light on the current situation?
Sure, sure. Well, here's what I can say that back in 1993 and 94, of course, that's, there was a lot of homeowners, there were a lot of fishermen, there were a lot of people that were mad at each other, depending on what side of the fence you were on. And there are probably some still some bad blood today as a result of that. And that I do know. There was a lot of meetings back in the past, and some of them were very heated, discussed meetings. One thing I can tell you is that the role of the Jackson Parish watershed pre 1993 was that the Louisiana statutes allowed that there was some communication between the watershed and the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. However, what a lot of people do not know is that there was this act of 1993 that was passed by the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries that where the pre 1993 the regulations would always say that the Jackson Parish watershed in conjunction with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Well, the new act of 1993 took the Jackson Parish watershed out of the equation, and it became solely the responsibility of the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And so, was it irony or was it just perfect timing? But it just seemed like that the timing of the hydrilla and the carp, it's kind of ironic that the the carp were put in the same month that the current state record was caught out of Caney Lake in February of 1994.
Yeah, the math doesn't lie and the numbers don't lie. And while there have been, some big fish caught during what I call the carp period or the carp era of Caney Lake, it it, it certainly wasn't like what I consider the first heyday of Caney. And it's definitely not like what I call the second heyday of Caney, which is, the last several years, because the hydrilla is returning. And, biologists will tell you one thing, but all us fishermen know that hydrilla, if it can be contained and controlled, is absolutely a good thing as far as bass fishing is concerned. Now, I know Jeff Sibley pretty good, and he has told me that their goal is to try to keep the hydrilla coverage around the 20% mark. I think that's the number that he used. And as long as they can keep it around there, then they're going to, hopefully not look at more aggressive things. Is that kind of what you're hearing, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought I remember hearing him say that they were targeting in the 17 to 31% range, somewhere along in the upper parts of 30%. Um, and again, we will have a meeting, hopefully in the latter part of April, the first part of May, where he will come down and we'll get actual some real numbers of what the percentage of grass is or good grass is compared to the fish shock surveys that they do, and be able to let them say what their findings are as far as the grass goes and findings are as far as the fish goes.
Yeah, so now let's get forward, and I would encourage everybody who can attend those meetings. They're public meetings, everybody to attend, and I'll do my best to try to go down there and video the things or live stream them or whatever, because lots of interesting information in that. Now let's fast forward. I've got this picture up here of somebody spraying. And if I didn't know any better, there ain't many cypress trees on it, though. I'd swear that was Caddo or Bistino, but that's actually a picture of Caney Lake and the wildlife and fisheries spraying. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that picture was taken in August of 2022 after we had a deluge of rain. And that picture is actually in the Caney Landing Cove. That's the cove actually that I live in. And the morning that I got up and went to work, I looked to my right as I was leaving my cove, and all I saw was a sea pasture of green. I was like, "What in the world is that?" And it totally caught me off guard as to the amount of Salvinia that was socked into that pocket. And it wasn't long after that. I mean, Facebook started lighting up with people taking pictures all over Caney Lake with similar results of where the hydrilla, I mean, I'm sorry, the Salvinia was in back of all the coves, and it took a 4 to 6 inch rain to to wash out or flush out the Salvinia out of those pockets. And um, and so I drove down to Caney Lake Landing, and I just looked at that, and I took this picture, And I immediately got on the phone and I called the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and I said, guys, I have never seen this. Y'all need to get down here and come look at this. I said this whole area is a sea of of Salvinia,
Right.
to the likes of which we have never seen on Caney Lake. And so they came down and they assessed it, and it wasn't long after that they started spraying, and and thank goodness, fast forward to today. I mean, we've had several rains where we've had the low water and we've had the high water, but I have seen very little to no Salvinia in 2024.
Well, that's a good thing, and I call it the devil weed because that stuff. I mean, I could do a whole show by myself for about 3 hours on my soapbox about Salvinia. And unfortunately for Caney, Caney doesn't have a huge watershed, so even in a when y'all get a rise in the lake level down there, you don't have a whole lot of current pulling through that lake to pull that Salvinia out of there. And the upside is Caney's pretty wide open, so it's easy to spray it and it's easy to keep it under some sort of control, unlike Bistineau and Caddo that are full of cypress trees and just physically getting to the Salvinia to spray it or whatever is a problem. I also will say this because a lot of people will say, well, yeah, well, why don't you just go out there and, get one of those mechanical harvesters and all that? What people have to realize is that giant Salvinia is a type of fern. It grows by fragmentation, which means basically when you chop it up, you're making more of it. Every time we run through it with our boat props and chop it up, we're literally making more, and the stuff will already grow. It'll like double in area of size like every 3 days or something like that under ideal conditions, which is warm weather, warm water temperatures. So keeping it under control on Caney Lake right now, while it is still controllable, is a huge issue and something y'all, yeah, absolutely need to keep an eye on.
Right, and so, I think it's extremely important, for our area businesses and our Airbnbs, and for our boat ramps, and for our, businesses that are on the water, that we keep that waterway for that opening with that Sylvania. And like I say, I mean, it was the likes of which we've never seen, and a lot of people went into panic mode, and and I do thank the Wildlife and Fisheries for coming and being very aggressive in the spraying and of the Salvinia, and and but being on the watershed, I, you got to realize that you have to be neutral in looking at the fishing side and the recreation side, and I'm for both. I mean, I want everybody to enjoy Caney Lake from the fishing community. I want people to enjoy Caney Lake from the recreational community. But what I do understand is that if you have a lake full of Salvinia, nobody's going to enjoy it. Nobody, and you can
Nobody.
you know yourself.
Yeah, the camp owners just think the hydrilla is bad. Wait till the Salvinia, God forbid it ever does, gets bad on Caney Lake because you'll know a new meaning of nuisance weed down there. And I also want to say this: I've got posted the last two Lake Bistineau Salvinia meetings at the Wildlife and Fisheries office over there around Menden. And they're hour and a half long videos, but actually some interesting information because Bistineau has just been an absolute nightmare. I mean, they're drawing down Bistineau basically every year just to keep it under control, sort of. You don't have the ability to do that on Caney Lake. I was reading the wildlife or the water body management report from Caney, and unfortunately, that the way I understand it, that spillway wasn't really designed for drawdowns anyway, and the gates have not been maintained by the DOTD like they should have been over the years. And so there's some question whether y'all ever had to open the gates, if you could close them, and that whole thing. So you've got that problem. So anyway, the long story made short is keep it under control. Some of the collateral damage from the spraying will be the killing of some of the hydrilla just because it's going through the water column, but you got to keep that Salvinia under control.
Right, right.
And,
Well,
and I'll add this in too. I mean, I don't know if y'all probably don't have the authority. Maybe the Jackson Parish Police Jury might, but it may be DOTD. But in Texas, you go over to Texas and you got one sprig of Salvinia on your boat or trailer, they write you a ticket right there at the ramp.
right.
So hopefully it won't come to
Well,
that. Hopefully people will self police and check their trailers and all that.
well, like I say, I've been on Caney a lot in 2024, and I have not seen any Salvania. That doesn't mean that it's not there, but I haven't seen it like it was in 2023. That's for sure.
Good deal.
But yeah, if you got some time, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the past accomplishments that was on Caney Lake.
Absolutely. I want to end the show on an absolute positive note because Caney Lake is probably my favorite lake of all time ever. So, yeah, unless the thunderstorm cuts us off, share out some stuff.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you. And what I'd like to share is just a little bit of past history about some of the things that have gone on Caney Lake. Since um, in the last few years, and in 2000, my good friend Kenny Cobb, he caught a 1289 bass on Caney that allowed him to fish Lake Conroe later that year, and he won the Big Bass World Championship and a beautiful bass boat because of the fish that he caught on Caney Lake. And so that Caney Lake got put on the record, got put out there, and as a result of Kenny catching his big fish on Caney Lake. And I would also like to pay tribute to the late Mr. Kenneth Walker, who probably single handedly caught more double digit fish than anybody else on Caney Lake any given time. The word on the street is that he probably caught well over 100 double digit bass in his tenure fishing on Caney Lake. and to me, that is an amazing accomplishment. And I hope that his son Chris is listening in with us today. Also, another angler that is a very accomplished angler, Mr. Freddie Hightower, he has won over 50 bass tournaments on Caney Lake, which is an amazing feat um, by any stretch of the mean. Since he fished tournaments, and so these are just three of the many legendary guys that have fished on Caney Lake that are very well known in the community and highly regarded as some of the best anglers that have ever fished Caney Lake. And you talked about Dana Walker. He was likewise. I mean, he was a legendary bass fisherman on Caney Lake as well. And I would like to say that Caney's popularity today is probably as good as it's ever been. In especially in the last 10 years. And it seems to be like when you have good fishing, you got good recreation, you got opportunities to bring your family to Caney Lake, then that is good for the economy. And so you got people coming to the area that are eating, they're buying gas, they're buying groceries, and they're bringing their family, and so that's what today's Caney, the positive rebound, what Caney looks like today. And I would just like to say that we've got we have these local tournaments that are on the lake all the time. We've been blessed to have the high school kids come and fish Caney Lake with Bass Nation, with the Northeast Louisiana fishing groups that are able to reach out to these young anglers. And Caney has been a stepping stool for a lot of them. And in visiting with Tommy, the kids from Bass Nation was excited to come to Caney Lake this year, and as well as last year. And so, I mean, if you look back at it, that's what it's all about. And if you can, regardless of where you sit, people think, well, you have too many tournaments on Caney. Well, I always go back to look at the kids, and without the kids and without the future of the angling, that could be potentially be a dying sport. So I think that's one drive that keeps us as the watershed wanting to make sure that we have good clean water, that we have a good place for these people to come fish, and as long as the role of the wildlife and fisheries. And but we also have, last year, the Louisiana Ornithological Society, which are the bird watchers, they came to Caney Lake, done a big tour. on Caney Lake, back looking for the, they were specialized looking for the loons. And we also have a local artist that's on Caney Lake, Miss Sharon Doucet. She is inspired by um, the Caney Lake, and she's made several pictures, posters about Caney Lake. So that's also positive for the community. We have another group of ladies called Our Ladies of the Lake that they raise money for awareness for a lot of cancer patients, and the money is given out to the local cancer patients here locally in Jackson Parish. So they're on the lake, as well as and I think you've got some of the upcoming events that we might could talk about, that will give people an opportunity to come see what Caney Lake has to offer. I think you had some of those events there.
Yeah, and I want to say this too. I'll just kind of interject this. Caney Lake is one of the cleanest lakes that I've ever been to, especially in Louisiana. And I don't mean just the water quality. It's not like a normal lake. It's not gin clear like an Arkansas lake, but it is a very clear Louisiana water. But I mean the shoreline around Caney Lake. Even in the old days, before all the houses were in there, Caney Lake was very clean. Up and down the highways generally around Caney, it's a very clean lake. And you've got plenty of good quality boat ramps that you guys are helping maintain, and other folks and all that. Easy access to get to it. There's Jonesboro, Hodge right there close. Ruston's not far. What Monroe, West Monroe's right up the road. So you've got plenty of areas for people to go and visit and do other things while they're down there on the lake. And that's a big factor, whether you're going down there to bass fish tournaments, or if you're just going down there to water ski and pleasure boat too.
Right. And we're very blessed to have several Airbnbs now on Caney Lake that you can make arrangements with and come and stay on the lake and be right here on the water and enjoy what Caney Lake has to offer.
Absolutely. All right, give me just a second here. I'm going to try to switch screens again, but I got to do a little correction here on my end technically. And I'm going to put, we've got a couple of events coming up that you had sent to me. I think one of them, let's see, let me get this up on the screen about 10 seconds here. All right, so I'm gonna hit that button, and then it should show. So this is looks like you got an annual gumbo cook-off and spring festival going on before too long. So tell us a little bit about that, or what do you know? It's put on by the Caney Lake Community Foundation.
Right. Yes, that is true. And the Caney Lake Community Foundation, I believe they were founded in 2020. But what they do is they use this gumbo cook-off, and they use the chili cook-offs, and they use that to raise funds to do community projects. But the main community project that they do for the local area is the Freedom Celebration for the fireworks and the fireworks show that'll be going on July the 6th. So May 18th will be the gumbo cook-off, and they allow vendors to come in and set up if they have have booth of where they want to sell their goods. But if you think you're the best gumbo cooker in the state of Louisiana, well, you need to contact the Caney Lake Community Foundation and sign up the dotted line and come and cook and put your money where your mouth is. If you think you're a good gumbo cook, then they're taking still taking applications for that. And so but the July 6th celebration really is the big thing. This on Caney Lake that draws a lot of people from a lot of different parishes and across the state. And so the Freedom Celebration, again with July 6th, the flotilla starts that morning, and then the big uh, thing that evening is the firework display will start around 9 p.m. And so I would encourage anybody if you've never been to the firework display that the Caney Lake Community Foundation puts on for the public. It is a sight to behold, Rex. And when I say that, there's not a lot of places that you can go get on the water and see a firework display because of the way Caney the linearity of Caney Lake, you can look all the way down the lake, and just about any cove you can come out to the main part of the cove and watch the fireworks because they shoot them from the spillway. And so it's going to last about 15 minutes, but it is going to be one of the most spectacular uh, displays of fireworks because of the boom over the water and the just the atmosphere that's created. And so I strongly encourage people to come to that. And then shortly after that, on September the 8th, they'll be having another fundraiser through the Caney Lake Community Foundation, um, where they'll be having a chili cook-off. And again, the same kind of thing where they'll be having vendors come, and they'll be having cook, vendors come to sell their goods, and then cooks to come to display their chili cooking skills.
Well, so not only do y'all have great fishing and great boating down there and all that, you got all this other stuff going on too. Y'all got a heck of a community going on down there. It sounds like.
Well, I am very proud to be a part of this this community, and I'm very proud to be on the watershed. And I think once you realize that you're stronger in numbers, and when you have the support of the tourism board, and when you have support of the Caney Lake Community Foundation, and the Chamber of Commerce and the police jury, and everybody all is all on the same page, and you're all working for public use. I think that is um, where you can really put a shine and a light on Caney Lake. It does not need any introduction. I mean, everybody knows about Caney Lake, but I just want to make sure that the path that we're on with Caney Lake is positive for the community, and that people can come and enjoy Caney Lake, and that um, they can raise their families here and bring their families here, and just enjoy what Caney Lake and Jackson Parish has to offer.
Gary, I think that pretty much summed it up best. I won't keep you any longer because it's starting to thunderstorms are getting closer and closer here. So again, I don't want to tempt fate too much longer, but I will just say this again: Caney Lake has always kind of had a special place in my heart. It's a wonderful lake, great area around there, and to see what y'all have been able to do with the watershed board and the local police jury and the local sheriff's department, everybody else that involved in keeping that lake a special place and a gem in the state of Louisiana is wonderful. I'd also like to say I'm very thankful that the wildlife and fisheries are looking at it from a overall standpoint of trying to keep it balanced as a world class fishery as far as bass fishing goes. And well, there's lots of crappie and big brim down there too. And also balance that with the other recreational sports. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight and spending some time and educating everybody and on what the watershed board does and some of the things that are going on down there at Caney Lake and in Jackson Parish. You're welcome back anytime, Gary. And I think Gary is frozen. We have tempted fate too long. And so maybe his connection's gone down or whatever. Maybe mine has. But look, I'll go ahead and wrap it up here, folks. I want to thank all of y'all for joining in on the show. We've been running about 20 to 25 people, give or take, for the last hour. Appreciate the comments and all that. And I will put some more of this information in the outdoor news. I will post it as and also how to get in touch with Gary and all that if you'd like to reach out to him directly. Again, want to thank everybody for watching. I'm going to hit the finish button because, well, it looks like the show's over. I'll be back probably. I'm trying to do these every Monday night and come up with some good guests, quality guests on. Sometimes I get on my soapbox about other things. It just kind of depends on what's happening in the hunting and fishing world, but I encourage you all to like and share this out on Facebook. Head over to the YouTube page, search for the Outdoor News with Rex, and subscribe over there. And I will look forward to seeing y'all the next time I do a show.
Well, I'm back.
Got you back. Okay. Well, I was just doing a wrap up anyway, Gary. I was just thanking you. It's thunder's rumbling pretty good. Really appreciate you spending some time tonight and coming on. And I think Gary made it back for just a second anyway. All right, that's it, folks. I'm going to hit the finish button. Appreciate y'all watching. See you next time on the Outdoor News.